welcome to another Wargame review from theplayersaid.com. My name's Alexander.
And I'm Grant.
And today we're taking a look at the expansion for Labyrinth. And it's a new expansion called Labyrinth, The Forever War, 2015 question mark. So, it's designed by,
Trevor Bender.
Trevor Bender. Okay, I want to make sure. I always want to say
And we met Trevor. Remember, we met him at WBC
yes.
last summer.
Very nice chap. So this is the second expansion for Labyrinth. Labyrinth, originally designed by Volko Ruhnke, what, 10 years ago? More? Gosh.
Yeah, probably going on 10 years.
Something like that.
8-10 years.
It's been a while.
So good.
The first expansion was Labyrinth The Awakening, all about the Arab Springs and how that affects conflict.
Is that in 17, maybe?
Yeah, 17 or 18. And then, so this is the newest one, just came out probably a month or two ago.
Yeah.
We finally sat down and played this one. Off the bat, Labyrinth, one of my favorite games ever. If not my favorite game.
And we had this conversation as we were playing one of my top 3 games of all time, too.
We have played this a number of times. I love Labyrinth.
Yeah.
So even the first expansion, this expansion is no exception to it. What this expansion does is it just gives you different stuff to kind of play around with, basically.
Yeah.
So,
well, it really, what it does is it gives you 120 new cards.
Yes.
And you don't have the other cards because time has passed and
yes.
you don't have the Patriot Act anymore. And, I mean, all those things that we focused on, the cards are different. Yes. They're just different.
And where this expansion differs, so Labyrinth had the base game. The Awakening added a significant number of extra mechanics.
Yes, Caliphates,
Civil War, there were militia units, Awakening, Reaction. There was all this other stuff that it added some extra countries that you would have kind of off-map. So it added a whole bunch of stuff. The Forever War is just a deck of 120 cards, and then a small set of new event counters for some of those cards.
Right. Once you play those cards, you'll put, for instance, this off-map box.
Yes.
That's new.
But the off-map box comes from Awakening.
Oh, did it come from Awakening?
Yes, it did.
Okay.
So, you need to have Awakening to have this one.
Yes.
You cannot skip that middle expansion, because this uses, especially the new countries like Mali, Nigeria, you get a new Syria card, a new Iran card that you just literally place over the top of the Iranian space. You do need that stuff. It still has the Awakening and the Reaction stuff. You use those elements from the Awakening, but a lot of it is toned down because a lot of that stuff is either just tapering off or it's 3 or 4 years in the past.
Right.
And it's very interesting playing the expansions to this game because, I mean, it really is the passage of time. Mm-hmm. When you play that core base game, 9/11 just happened. Mm-hmm. You've got to invade Afghanistan. And you're probably going to at some point invade Iraq if you need to. Yeah. And the cards are those current events. Mm-hmm. And you play The Awakening, and it's like all this Arab Spring stuff, a lot of Obama-era administration stuff. Mm-hmm. And this one's 2015, and a lot of the scenarios are 2016, 2017. So it's all very, very current stuff. Yeah. So it's all the names that you hear in the news today. Mm-hmm. But all of that other stuff's happened, so it's super, super current affairs stuff. Yeah. Like, there's a Brexit card with Theresa May on it that was just last year.
Yep. Like, absolutely,
stuff that's happening now. Yep. What was funny is Trevor on Twitter today was like, I could make one just for 2020, like a whole expansion, just because things change so rapidly these days. Yeah. But you get to kind of play that out on the board. But this expansion is just deck of cards, new events. And so I enjoyed that I didn't have to learn a whole bunch of new extra mechanics. No, yeah. It was really easy. Just set it up, kind of remember some of the different bits and pieces from Awakening, and it was just, you play Labyrinth, but it's just a totally different situation. Yeah. The scenario setups are different. It just gives you a different set of constraints that you start with. But you don't have to learn a whole bunch. There's not a ton of extra rules in this game. Yeah. Not in this expansion, at least.
And I think there are 2 or 3 different scenarios. So
yes, 3 or 4.
You have different setups, and so I mean, this game you could, just like we've played Labyrinth so much, you could play this one so much and become more familiar with the cards, and there's just more goodness. It's just great.
And it does have a set of rules for playing a campaign game.
Right.
Where you do deck of core game,
all those cards,
deck of awakening, deck of this, and you play through all the events, and there's some key changes and things. You can do that if you are so inclined.
Should we do that and record that? That'd be like a 15-hour video.
Here's why I would say no.
No? Okay.
Because so few of our games go beyond one deck. There's almost
I don't know if we're either bad at it or we're either super good that... I don't know. I don't know.
If a game goes...
Most of it's 1 to 2 decks. That's it.
At most. Yeah. Like, if we get into the second deck, we'll get about halfway through, and probably
then the game's over.
Probably the game's gone one way or the other at that point. So setting up a whole campaign, I'm like, we'll never get to the end.
Part of the problem is you're so obtuse that you just can't see the hammer coming for you. And then you're so sneaky. If you win, it's like, oh, I didn't even know that was happening.
Yes.
You know. It's just so interesting that I love that this game was designed, and now that we have 2 expansions, and it's still Labyrinth.
Yes.
Just with some new bells and whistles.
Yes.
And those new bells and whistles are typically current events of the day. So it's like you're reliving the last 3 to 5 years throughout the events of these cards. And I really like that. I love the way this game makes me feel. I feel helpless. I feel utter despair. I feel anger. I feel dice luck and hate.
Yeah.
I feel, why can't I draw the cards I need? But I also feel exhilaration and joy when it goes the way that you're like, oh, this is working out the way I planned it. I set this trap and Grant walked right into it, and I got this little nexus of countries and Alexander can't do anything about it, and I just love the way that game makes me feel. I love it.
Of all the 2-player games that I've ever played, this is probably one of the ones that's the most tense.
Yes.
Just every time you draw a new hand of cards, you got to sit there and you're like, look at what you've got, and you're like, you got to make something out of this. Like you've got to make something out of what you've got.
Well, and not only you got to make something, you can't
die to it.
You can't be destroyed.
Yeah.
So let me focus on that real quick. The very last hand I had before I ended up winning that, there was a very specific order that I had to order my hand in order to make things happen. If one thing went wrong, it would have thrown that out of equilibrium, and I would have had to wait to the next hand to attempt to do something again.
Yes.
That is fantastic. It's such an interesting experience when you can line those cards up and really understand, I got to do this and that, and then throw in, you're going to play a card that's going to change things. So it's never really sure.
But I don't know what you've got, so what I might be like, this is kind of a throwaway thing. Well, that might actually really help you in a situation. I'm like, ugh.
So that card angst is probably my favorite part.
Well, and that's something that I think that we like.
Mm-hmm.
There's even in non-war games like Mage Knight, where it's that deck building and it's how and when do I play my cards.
Getting the right combination that you can make. Yep.
That stuff that's a fun exercise for me to play through.
It is.
And for it to have game effects and to and like you said, to me this game is the ultimate cat and mouse game.
It is.
I'm the jihadist player. I'm trying to go around laying traps or making things unconscionably difficult for you, and to achieve my own goals. And there's nothing more rewarding than like, I've set this kind of sneaky trap up for you, you fall into it, and then I just run away and do a whole bunch of other stuff, and you're like stuck there in this quagmire. There's something rewarding in a game sense about doing that.
Mm-hmm. Well, and the other great thing about this, most of us that play war games play with the same people. Right? We're a team. We're going to play these games because my wife sure isn't going to play this with me. I don't think Kelly's going to play it with you.
No, she is not.
Atticus is not old enough. My daughters aren't interested. So we have learned. I've learned your tells. You've learned my tells. You know my strategies. I kind of know your strategies, and it's really fun trying to do those deking and elusive things, and when you get something to pull off. And I could see you were working. You were working.
Doing my best.
Yeah. And you needed a couple more cards. And it just happened to be that I got the cards I needed. And
well, and that's, it's a couple rolls don't go your way.
You missed two major jihads in a row. Now, I don't even know how you rolled. You rolled 3 dice.
I rolled 3 dice and it was like 4, 5s, and 6s.
Yeah, and it's like, that's a major failure, and you lost all your guys.
And it
or most of your guys.
Does what you've been doing.
That, and I was, what did I say? What did I say? Justice.
Yeah, right.
Because I think early on I had some of that bad luck. I feel like we're talking about Labyrinth more than we are about the Forever War, but it's so intertwined that the game system is there. The mechanics and the framework, it's there.
Yes.
Trevor has now just come along and created 120 new cards that play.
And just got some nice current affairs in it.
And it's the same game in general, just with some little tweaks.
And because of its relation to where it is, kind of post-Awakening, you have the Awakening stuff.
It's like hanging around.
It is significantly toned down, though.
Yeah.
I mean, out of the game that we played, went through the whole deck, maybe
8-10 cards
at most.
Yeah.
At most that added or removed Awakening and reaction markers. So that is very much on the back burner.
Yeah.
Whereas in the Awakening expansion, that's
it's
like
every card.
I mean, that's like
or every
50%
other card.
of what you're doing, especially in the early game. It's like yes. Get as much of that out as possible because you can win with that.
Yep.
Here, it's more of like you can get the accents of that, and it's just gonna help you in a few very isolated situations.
And it's also going to help you in a very different way. If you remember in the Awakening, you were really trying to get the reaction markers or the Awakening markers to then basically work on their own.
Yes.
And start shifting the alignment, from ally to neutral to adversary.
Yes.
And that's what you were able to set that up. In this game, there's so few cards. It's meant to be a supplement and in essence, just an extra modifier to your War of Ideas roll for me, and to your
penalties for your War of Ideas.
Right. That's how you fight me. So it wasn't necessarily a big part of the game, and I think I made that mistake early on because I got a couple of the cards in my hand. I'm like, oh, well, I'm gonna put these couple markers down, and all of a sudden I'm like, oh, I never saw another card again until 30 cards, 40, 50 cards into the deck. So. You can't fall into that trap. Don't fall into that trap with this game. That's a supplement. It is not a main focus.
Yes, but that's we're talking about Labyrinth, but that's because this is a little bit more like the base game because all that extra stuff is toned down significantly.
Right.
It's still there. You still have if you start with the 2016 scenario, boom, Caliphate in Syria and Iraq.
Yeah.
It's there. You still got to deal with that.
Yeah.
I think we had 3 civil wars going at one point.
We did. Yeah, which is pretty rare, I would assume.
Maybe.
But we had 3 going, and now they're all gone. There's nothing on the board.
Once you stamp those out, because you don't have all the other stuff going on, it's really hard for me to kind of stoke them and flare them up again, which is ideally what I'd like to do.
And it was hard for me to stamp those out. It wasn't easy. I had to get those countries to good, what's that called? It's not their alignment, but it's their governance.
Yep.
You had to get them into good governance to get that away, and that's not easy.
No.
It takes forever. So I really like that, but don't get caught into believing that this is like the Awakening and that you're going to have 50 of those cards and it's going to be a major part. Yeah. It is not. Now, another element that was included in this game, kind of a current event, is the Trump tweets cards.
Yes.
We didn't experience them, I think, traditionally because they just didn't come up till later in the game.
Yes.
But just so you understand what they are, and I'm not going to read everything to you, but it's a chaotic, who knows what will happen.
Yeah, you play it and you roll a die, 1 through 6, and it's just whatever it is. There's 6 different options, and that's what it is.
Yep. Well, and it's actually 1 through 8.
Oh, it is?
Because you modify it with U.S. Prestige modifier.
I see.
So, but it's not like the higher you roll, the better.
Oh.
Because some of the really bad ones are high as well. Negative. Well, actually, the higher you get, the better they are. So
So if you've got good prestige, you can roll high.
You're a little more
you'll get
willing
some
to use
stuff.
them. So it's like random reaction marker, -1 prestige, remove an aid marker, and +1 funding. So 0 through 3 is good for the Jihadist, right? And then 4 through 8 is generally good for the US player. It's -1 funding to the Jihadist, placing an aid marker, +1 prestige, and then a random awakening marker. So it's actually, which is interesting because I'm not sure that's what it feels like.
I don't know.
But it's interesting. And then some of those cards then play off of that.
But I remember during the design process, Trevor tweeted out those, and I'm like, oh, that looks like it would be such a neat little piece of chaos to throw into this.
Right.
And unfortunately, in this game we played, man, they were all at the bottom end of the deck.
Right.
And I think those would be cool if you can get some of them early on, because they also place out a little marker that just says Trump tweets on.
Yep.
And it has an off side as well.
Yep.
And that marker powers some of the other events in the game.
Yep.
So this event says, you can play this if Trump tweets are off or on. Or I had an event that was like, flip the marker over and then do this other thing.
Yep.
And so we missed out on that little aspect, which could have a nice structure throughout a whole game.
It could.
Just because it's a couple of other cards play off of those, and you might be more or less willing to trigger those to have other game effects if you had them in your hand.
But the other, go ahead, sorry.
Well, I'm like, they were just at the bottom of our deck, which kind of sucked.
Yeah, well, and we shuffled it 40 times.
Oh, gosh.
I mean, but the other thing is, that turning on and turning off, typically when you play one of the cards that plays off of it, it either turns it on or it turns it off. You said that, but it's like, think about that. They're not going to come back on that easily in that one deck. You got 3 of them in there. There's 120 cards there. That's not going to come out a whole lot. No. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So you may not see those Trump tweet cards again to be able to manipulate that until the next deck.
But there's 3 of those cards of the actual tweets, and then there's probably 4
10.
or 5.
I would say there's 8 or 10.
There might be. But it's just neat that there's there's a little thread that goes through that deck. Yeah. And I don't know if the core game, The Awakening, doesn't have that. Mm-hmm. Where there's really like this little set of mini cards in there that does a lot of stuff together. I think that's really cool from a mechanical standpoint.
It's kind of a game within a game in some ways.
Just a mechanic inside. Like, it's a little bit of coincidence. Oh, dang, this thing. Oh, sweet, I got this actual card. Sweet, I can play off of that and this. Yeah. Boom, let's do it. And then it's like, oh, I've got this card that could play off of that. Like, maybe I'll try triggering this other thing. Yeah. It's just neat. It's an extra little bit of continuance through the deck, which is, I don't know, I've not seen that in this game before, which is cool. I enjoyed that. The little bit that we saw. Well,
and with 120 cards, it's going to take you 4 or 5 plays to really become comfortable with those cards. I think now when we play the base game of Labyrinth, there's cards that I know. Yep. Martyrdom. I know exactly what that card does. What was the one you were talking about earlier that you're looking for? Skilled.
It is. It's that martyrdom.
It's just what happens. So it's like, those cards are there and they're eventually going to come up, and you're either going to have to play them because you're the U.S. player, and because I can't get rid of my cards, and you're going to get them eventually, and it's going to hurt you. So I don't know. This game, this entire system is so amazing. It's unreal to me.
Yeah, I was. I'll be honest. Because of how current this game is and the current affairs in it, I was like, do I even have the energy for it? Mm-hmm. And I did. Yeah, right. I like the game so much, and the game really does focus on the global war on terror still, and so many foreign affairs. That it was just like, oh no, I'm just playing Labyrinth, no big deal. Yeah. It doesn't have a lot of domestic politics in there. Right. Which can be, I know, it turns a lot of people off at the moment. Yeah. So I was happily refreshed that this was just, the game that I really like and enjoy playing. It was just more of that. Yeah. And it toned down the Awakening stuff, which I'm not bemoaning that.
I actually enjoyed that aspect of that expansion.
The Awakening's fun.
But I'm glad it got toned down.
But it's The Awakening.
Yeah, right.
I love the core game of Labyrinth. Yeah. This brings it... It's kind of like we have Labyrinth, it's like the Awakening's got a bunch of stuff, and this kind of brings it right back here.
Yeah.
So we get back to this little sweeter spot.
Yep.
Where I'm not trying to spin quite as many plates.
Yeah.
Not to worry about all this other stuff as much.
I think the sweet spot is your key statement there. This is kind of back to that real sweet spot.
Yeah, and that's I love Labyrinth.
Yeah.
Because it's, I mean, you've got a few things to do, and you just like do them. Adding the other stuff was good for fun history and some learning and exploration of what you can do. But this brings it closer back to the original with you're spinning fewer plates and it's putting out fewer fires to an extent. So you still have a lot to do, but and it's always nice just playing a different situation.
Yeah.
Because whenever we play Labyrinth, it's always that it's like the post 9/11.
Yeah, right.
You know, it's like invade Afghanistan on turn 1 every single time.
Yep.
Right?
Yeah, that's
it's
what
always
happens.
that. And so playing with the totally different starting setup was very, very... it was just
It
nice,
gave us different things to focus on.
Refreshing.
Yep, it
as
was.
Well. But also, I've just watched this in the news in the last 2 years.
Yeah, you're right.
So I knew exactly, like...
Yep.
I know exactly what that setup looks like on a map on the BBC because I've looked at it more times than I care to admit.
Yeah.
One
before you say
Sure,
that,
sure.
I think the only other statement I would have is I would really enjoy to see the next iteration of this. And I know Trevor, as you mentioned, kind of tweeted out,
I think it was a joke.
I know, but there have been a lot of things that have happened this year. And I'm not talking about just COVID. There's been obviously a lot of other social, political, foreign affairs items that have changed. And it's just going to continue to do that. So I like that the system will continue to evolve.
Yeah, if there's not another expansion in the next 5 years,
I'd be disappointed.
Yeah, I'll put good money on that.
Yeah.
That there will be. Someone will do it. But yes, I will show you the board and a little bit of what it looks like, and then we'll wrap up with some final thoughts. So here's a look at the map, and if you've played Labyrinth or The Awakening, the first expansion, then this will look very familiar to you. So again, you do have to have the Awakening expansion to play the Forever War, and that's because it uses this overlay of Iran and of Syria, and it has these two, Nigeria and Mali, in the lapsing event boxes down here. You do have to have those. It also does use these blue little militia cylinders. These are, those also come from that expansion, as well as these, a couple Awakening markers, the Caliphate capital. That starts in Syria and Iraq in the 2016 scenario. So you do have to have that. You use a lot of those components, but like we kind of discussed, those elements are toned down. So in the Awakening, the Caliphate plays a large part, but the Awakening and the reaction markers play a significant part in the game. Almost kind of overtaking, like, that's really the stuff that you're already playing. Whereas this is just the remnants of kind of the Arab Spring. So there's a couple of Awakening and reaction markers that get put out, but not nearly as many as before. And the civil wars don't crop up as much because the Arab Springs aren't quite as polarizing. There's just fewer cards that affect those, significantly fewer. But so in effect, this game reduces a lot of that Awakening stuff. You're just getting, again, we've said this. You get a deck of 120 cards, and you just get a new set of the kind of event markers. That's it. There's no extra or other components that you get in the game. So it kind of, I don't want to say it strips away a lot of that extra stuff, but it definitely tones it down because it's happened already, and this is just some lingering effects of that. And it kind of brings you back just to kind of a core game of Labyrinth. Just a totally different setup and situation, and a totally different set of cards and game effects as a result of those. Now, we'll kind of go through just a couple of the rules, but the reality is if you've played Labyrinth or The Awakening, the rules are basically identical. It's just a new situation, new sets of cards, and new ways to play that same game. But if you've not played any of them, just a quick rundown. The game is entirely asymmetrical. There's a lot of different bits and pieces to the game. There's a US operations card and a Jihadist operations card. These are both completely different. The sides not only function differently, but have entirely different sets of requirements for victory conditions and how they actually function. The Jihadist player, and that's something I like, the victory conditions are printed here on this little victory track down here. The Jihadist player is attempting to get 6 resources under their control, and if 2 of those resources are adjacent, then they win the game. Failing that, if they can get 15 countries across the board in poor governance or Islamist rule, and they can reduce US prestige to 1, they win that way. The US player is basically trying to do the opposite. They need to get good resources to 12, but there's no adjacency rules. They just need 12 of them on the board. Or they need green good and yellow fair governance countries. They need 15 of those on the board. So there's a lot of stuff going on. They're playing asymmetrically. And it's really interesting. So when the Jihadist player plays one of their cards, because this is a card-driven game, they might look at the 3 ops value, and basically what that enables them to do is to take an action 3 times. It gives them 3 opportunities to do something. So, for example, if they wanted to lay a plot in Yemen, they could roll. They could roll twice, because you flip your 2 cells active, and you can roll that many times so that they can roll, and you have to roll the governance level or less. So 3 or less, you can place a plot. And then the plot level that you can play, there's 1, 2, or 3. You can play it equal to or less than the card value that you played. So we played that level 3 card. We can place a level 3 plot down. Now, the Jihadist player knows what they've placed, but the US player doesn't. It's face down. The higher the level plot, the more damage that it does. The more funding you gain, the better it is for the Jihadist player, basically. So, you can do a plot with a 1 level card, but at most, instead of placing a 3 plot, the most you can place, if you're successful, is a 1 plot. But again, you would only get 1 chance to do it. But if you roll 3 dice, so here we've got a bunch of guys. Well, you can't do it here because it's Islamist rule. If you have a bunch of guys, you can roll 3 dice. If they all succeed, you can put out 3 plots there if you were so inclined. So you might have some really good ones and some bad ones because your counter mix is limited. So you might end up having to put out poor ones. But then the US player, if they're trying to kind of remove those, they just have to try and guess which ones are the good ones, basically. So there's an element of chance there as well. But that's how the Jihadist player, their cards work. The value on the card basically is the number of chances they get to try and do things. If they want to move this guy over here, they have to roll a die. If they want to move someone else, you have to have played a card. So that's 1 ops, they can move 1 guy. If you play a card with 2 ops, you can attempt to move 2 guys. If you don't, so you got to make the die roll. To get into Pakistan, you have to roll a 1 or less, because they've got good governance, which translates into good border security, good checks, harder to bribe your way in, hard to sneak in, that kind of stuff. So it's really hard to kind of warp across the board into good places. That's why you want to get things into poor governance, because then it's a 50-50 shot you can get in. Roll a d6, 3 or less, you get in. But whilst that's very difficult, it can be handy. You can always just move to an adjacent space without rolling for free. You just, I'm going to move this guy. So he moves in here and he goes underground because they've lost him, so to speak. So you can move slowly, but you're guaranteed the movement. Or you can attempt to kind of warp across the board, literally probably flying commercially, but it's there's a good chance you won't be able to do it. You couldn't get the arrangements, you couldn't get your fake passports and all that kind of stuff. So you just fail, so the attempt fails. So that's kind of how, at least functionally, how they work. They're trying to roll governance or less to succeed at an action they're doing, and the card gives them the number of times they can attempt that action. A lot of the times given if they have enough cells there. The US player, on the other hand, their cards function differently. When they spend ops, their ops have to match the governance level of a country. So, for example, to play a card to do something in Saudi Arabia, the card value has to be 1 or more. So if it's good governance, you can influence it with a 1-level card, a 2-level card, or a 3-level card. It's really easy to affect change in places with good governance. You've got good diplomatic relations. They've got good public order. There's structures and infrastructure in place where it's easy to get things done. In somewhere like Libya, for example, in this game though, where this is poor governance, you have to play a 3 card, or if there was a 4 card or more. There's only 3 cards. So it's really hard, if you've got a hand which only has maybe 1 or 2 3 cards, the 3-level cards, usually the most powerful, but those are the only ones that can affect these. And you have to do stuff in these poor countries because you want to get them to for your fair good countries victory conditions, and also to stymie what the jihadist player is trying to do there as well. If you're trying to affect a fair country, you have to play a 2 card or a 3 card. A 1-level card will do nothing in Sudan. It will do nothing in Libya. A 2-level card will do nothing in Libya. Just your really expensive cards in these places. So how even the players play and how their cards affect places is entirely different. Like all good CDGs, green is a jihadist aligned event, grey is neutral, and then we have these tan US ones. It has a little US here, little Islamic symbol there, and the neutral ones are neutral. And this is a game where when I play an event, let's say I'm the jihadist player, and I have this in my hand, when I play this event will trigger for the opponent. If it benefits them, they get to do that thing. Now, the important part is that because I played the card, I get to choose, I get to do my 1-up, then you do your event, or you do your event, then I do my 1-up. And for some of the cards, that's a really important decision, because some of the cards might totally hose you, and so you're like, I'll let you do that, then I'm going to try and spend my ops to basically undo your card. That's punishing, in a sense, because you're then not doing what you need to do, you're just doing damage control, which is not really a cycle you want to get into in this game. If you're not proactively trying to win, the opponent will be, and once they start getting ahead, it can be really hard to kind of claw your way back in. So there's always painstaking choices to be made in this game. What cards you play, where, when, how. When you first get your hand of cards, we always sit here for probably 2 or 3 minutes just reading all the cards and trying to figure out some kind of loose order in which we're going to play them and what you're going to do. This game requires some forethought. You can't just fly by the seat of your pants in this game. You will lose every single time if you do that. This is a planners and thinkers game. With that being said, you play through the whole deck. It takes a couple hours at most. There is analysis paralysis to an extent, but once you've played it a couple times, it becomes obvious, like, okay, I can sustain this kind of failure or this bad card, these events, I can suck that up and try to do something else instead. You kind of get a feel for what you can and can't do, and what isn't worth trying to go for and assess. And that's something that I like about this game. It really rewards your overall battlefield assessment and trying to affect the things that you can. When you start getting into quagmires, things can get off the rails pretty quickly for you. But basically, the game is the jihadist player is the mouse and the US player is the cat to an extent. It's on the jihadist player to proactively go out, set plots, try and wreck all the regimes and destroy everything and turn everything towards their ideological standpoint and political standpoint. And it's for the US to kind of try and stamp out those fires whilst also trying to garner goodwill across the map, and also trying to keep Europe on their side. If they can keep Europe, as well as some of the other the non-Muslim countries, that, you know, Israel, Kenya, we got China, Russia, and Thailand, but Europe's a really big source of this stuff. If you can keep them in the same posture, like the same kind of, if they go on, basically it's hard or soft, their stance towards a global war on terror. If you can keep them on side, that's going to help you out by keeping your prestige up, as everyone agrees to an extent with what you're doing. And it's them trying to stop and isolate the jihadist player and then stamp them out. That's really what they're trying to do. Make it so difficult, get all this good governance that it's impossible for these extremists to succeed. So, it's a very, very interesting game. The expansion, honestly, it's hard to talk about it in a way because it's just current affairs. It's stuff that's happened in the last 5 years. It's just a new deck of cards with new events. And so it just gives you a new frame in which to play Labyrinth. That's really what this expansion does. It's just more of the same. You can play a campaign where you start in 2001 and go all the way to 2020. Well, I guess it's 2019 is basically when most of this stuff ends. I don't think there's anything from 2020 currently. But there's... It just gives, you can play through all of that if you were so inclined. That would be a very 3 decks. I mean, you're talking about, that's probably more of a 4 or 5 hour game if you play the whole length. I don't know. Typically someone wins before then. But there's nice minutia, there's nice crunch, but it's nothing massively overwhelming. But yeah, that's showing you the gameplay. The gameplay in this one is much more just like a regular Labyrinth. You've got a hand of cards. You're playing for ops and events. And the majority of what you're trying to do, the game starts with the Caliphate in Iraq and Syria. There's a lot of civil war going on. If you can crush that as the US and kind of take care of these two, then it's spread out, garner some goodwill, keep everyone on side, you'll do great. The jihadist players trying to spread those civil wars, expand the caliphate where they can, or at least hang on to it as long as possible. And it was very interesting where the action was in this game and how it was very different from the original Labyrinth game, where you always kind of start... Afghanistan gets invaded because it starts under Islamist rule. But you push guys into Pakistan trying to get these WMDs, and then it kind of pours out around this area. Whereas here it starts in Iraq and Syria. This is where all the action is, and I felt it was much easier and to kind of jump around to North Africa and create some instability there, try to pick up some resources, as well as getting one. I think we had Iraq under Islamist rule for a bit there as well. It was just neat to have a different set of shackles in which to play this game. But that's the core of the game. It's moving guys around, trying to set the governance to whatever you need it to be, good for the US, poor or Islamist rule for the jihadist player, and you do that by changing their alignment to one way or the other to kind of help bump it up. If they become a US ally, they can go from fair to good, but they have to be an ally to do that, to kind of get all the international aid and stuff like that. The game makes a lot of political assumptions and a lot of ideological assumptions, but the designers are like, okay, we're going to assume that all of that's just fine, and here's a set of parameters in which to kind of play this game. It doesn't speak one way or the other to what is and isn't good. It's like, well, let's just assume all this stuff is how it is, and we'll paint it. And it's a framework in which to play a fascinating cat and mouse game. It's so tense, and it's one of my favorite games. The the expansion, it's more of what I like. It kind of strips away more of the superfluous stuff, and it's not superfluous, but it kind of reined it back in a bit, so it was a bit tighter of a game than the previous expansion, I felt. So what we'll do is we'll wrap up with a few final thoughts. So that was a look at the map. Again, it's the core game of Labyrinth. The new stuff is just a deck of cards.
Yep.
So what you see is really most of what's already in the core game, / the Awakening expansion. Again, you do need that to play this.
Yes, you do.
So, whilst this isn't new, it's the cards. That's the real thing that you get new, with some new event markers for those cards.
Yeah. I loved it just as much as I've loved every other game we've played of Labyrinth and the other expansion. If you're a Labyrinth fan, this is a must-get.
Yeah.
I don't think there's a question. It's also very affordable. I mean, I don't know what the price is right now, but I would guess it's under $25 to $30, if even that. Okay. Maybe it's $40.
I want to say it was $37, but I don't know if that's true. That could be made up. I could have made that up.
You're buying a deck of cards and then like a half counter sheet. That's basically
not even a half counter.
Well,
sheet.
yeah,
it's literally 2 rows of counters.
Yeah, right. There's not a lot, but
yeah. So with that, I have the 3-inch box for Labyrinth. Everything, core game, mounted map, all 2 expansions. I have a single counter sheet, counter tray. Everything fits in the box.
Yeah.
So I don't have my cards sleeved. They were sleeved, might be a little bit tighter.
Yeah.
But they're unsleeved. Everything fits in the box, which is nice.
Yes.
I appreciate that I can do that.
Yes.
Because we have a lot of games where that's not possible.
Yeah, that's true. One more expansion though, and it's probably going to be pretty tight.
Yeah. You probably couldn't fit another expansion.
Yeah.
Just because the cards take a lot of space.
Yeah.
But because it's only a deck of cards and a very small amount of counters, it's just toss it in the box. If you've got the 2-inch box, you're having a laugh.
Yeah.
You can't even fit the core game in the 2-inch box.
Yeah, which is, we struggled with that. I remember, because we both had it, and I remember stacking my cards and trying to fan them out, and the same thing with Wilderness War and all. It was a CDG, fan them out, lots of cards, but I loved this.
Yes.
I believe it's a must-own if you like Labyrinth.
Yep.
Remember, you have to have the Labyrinth base game, and you have to have the Awakening expansion, and then buy this to play them because they use parts of all of that. So
at this
keep that in
point,
mind.
I'm like too far into Labyrinth where I will get every expansion that gets released.
There's no doubt.
But if you enjoyed Awakening and you have it, there's no reason you wouldn't want to play this, basically.
Well, I don't own this one, but I probably will buy it.
Yes. Do you have Awakening as well?
I do, yeah. I ended up buying it because we couldn't get another copy. But, I bought it just because and it's funny, I've never played it solo. I've tried, but it's just not my bag. I don't know.
You do get new solo boxes in this
You do. Which we haven't played with.
No.
So we're hoping that maybe I think they're on the fold-out.
They're in here.
Okay. Sorry. Magic of television.
But, because the original bots that came in my core game, I don't even have it up here, do I?
I don't know what you did with it.
No. I bought the game 5 years ago, 6 years ago?
5 or 6 years ago.
And it had the old bots, which were not good.
Yeah. Hard
they
to
were
use.
They've changed those bots.
Mm-hmm.
So much better. The Awakening changed them again, so you have these really nice bots. And then Forever War has its own set of bots, which are the nice new versions. So I probably will at some point actually try this out, he says, or I'll just play the digital version.
Well, yeah, true.
But there's something to be said about pushing stuff around I can do at my own leisure as well.
Yeah.
So you do get that as well, but that's it's literally just a rulebook which has the scenarios and some history and design notes.
Or player aids.
Two bots. You don't get new play aids. Oh, that's actually my only complaint with this. Is there should be a compiled rulebook of all 3.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point.
And updated play aids.
Yeah.
That is something that I thought was unfortunate that it was not in there.
Yeah.
Because
we were looking for the Awakening stuff on the plate, and it wasn't there. You got to go to the rule books.
Yes.
And we were like, oh, come on.
But I've got like the core game rule book that I'm flicking through. I've got the Awakening rule book.
It can be a little challenging.
Like, the tiny new rules in the new book. I'm like, get me a deluxe edition with a big rule book with everything.
Rule book that
and
big.
get me new play aids, and I'll be golden.
Yeah.
But other than that,
great
it's
game,
Labyrinth.
Yeah,
It's Labyrinth. I love it.
I had a fantastic time.
Forever War is it's a big win for me because it's more Labyrinth.
Yeah.
This different Labyrinth. This deck of cards felt very different from the other two decks of cards.
Very different.
So,
with the same tension, difficulty, angst,
absolutely,
pain, and exhilaration when things worked. It's that same feeling, just different cards, just different focus.
Yeah, I felt like this was a return to what the core game gives me.
Yeah.
And I appreciate that significantly. But yes, Labyrinth, the Forever War from GMT Games.
Yeah.
Big 2 thumbs up for me. It's one of my favorite games.
I don't know how this isn't amazing. So this will definitely make an appearance on my top 10, whatever we do.
Yes.
So, yeah,
but
awesome.
Yeah, Labyrinth, the Forever War from GMT. Appreciate you guys tuning in. I've been Alexander from theplayersaid.com.
And I'm Grant.